I am 102 years old, and I have never once bought a superfood powder, a green juice subscription, or a single bottle of whatever they're selling on television this week. Not one. Every nutritionist who told me eggs would kill me, every cardiologist who told me to count my fat grams, every person with a clipboard and a study and a very confident expression who told me the old ways of eating were dangerous. I have outlived every single one of them. And I am still here, in my own kitchen, cooking the same things my grandmother cooked, eating from the same traditions that fed people through wars and famines and 40 years in the wilderness. They built an entire industry around the idea that ancient food was primitive and modern food was progress. They convinced a whole generation to throw out butter and eat margarine, throw out eggs and eat egg substitutes, throw out bread and eat things that come in packages with 17 ingredients and a health claim on the label. Child, please. The Bible was describing the healthiest diet ever eaten by human beings thousands of years before anyone had a nutrition degree. And I have spent a century eating from that tradition. So let me tell you what I eat every day. And why? Olive oil, every single morning. Let me start here because this is where my day starts and has started for as long as I can remember. My grandmother kept a clay jar of olive oil on the counter beside the stove. Not a fancy bottle with a pretty label. A plain jar filled from a larger container she bought from a family 2 towns over who pressed it themselves. The oil was green gold and cloudy and smelled like something alive. Because it was. She drizzled it on everything. Bread, vegetables, beans, eggs. She rubbed it on our skin when we were dry or chapped in winter. She put a spoonful in warm water with lemon when any of us felt under the weather. She didn't know the word polyphenol. But polyphenols, that's just a fancy word for the protective colour and power packed into real olive oil. She understood those things the way you understand a person you've lived with for 60 years. Not through analysis. Through relationship. The Bible mentions olive oil over 140 times. Kings were anointed with it. Wounds were dressed with it. It lit the lamps of the temple. When the Good Samaritan in Luke 10 knelt beside a beaten stranger and poured oil into his wounds, that was not a spiritual gesture dressed up as medicine. That was medicine. Effective, proven ancient medicine. Modern research has spent decades confirming what the ancient world simply knew. Extra virgin olive oil reduces inflammation throughout the body. It protects the heart. It supports the brain. The compound olecanthal in real cold-pressed oil works so similarly to ibuprofen at the molecular level that researchers were genuinely stunned when they discovered it. The problem is, most of what's sold as olive oil today is not what my grandmother kept in that clay jar. Heat-processed, diluted, stripped of its living compounds. Read the label. Find cold-pressed extra virgin, ideally from a single source. It costs more. It is worth every penny. A tablespoon every morning, drizzled on everything. That is my first non-negotiable. Raw honey. Not the bear-shaped bottle. Raw honey. This one matters, and I need you to pay attention to the distinction I'm about to make. The honey in most grocery stores has been heated, filtered and processed to the point where it is essentially flavoured sugar syrup. It looks like honey. It tastes sweet like honey. But the living enzymes, the antimicrobial proteins, the beneficial compounds that make honey genuinely medicinal, those are gone. Cooked out, processed out, profit optimized out. Raw honey, harvested from the hive, minimally filtered, never heated past what the bees themselves maintain in the hive, is an entirely different substance. Scripture says it plainly. Proverbs, "Eat honey, for it is good." Jonathan dips his rod in honey and his eyes brighten. The promised land flows with milk and honey. This was not poetry about sweetness. This was recognition of a food that gave people strength and clarity and healing. When I was a girl and any of us got a sore throat, my mother didn't reach for medicine. She reached for the jar of raw honey she kept on the high shelf, the good honey from a neighbour who kept bees, and she gave us a spoonful straight, let it coat the throat slowly, and told us to stop complaining. We were never sick for long. Raw honey creates hydrogen peroxide on contact with tissue. It has a natural protein called defensin 1 that actively destroys bacteria. It is acidic enough that most pathogens cannot survive in it. Archaeologists have found 3,000-year-old honey in Egyptian tombs that was still perfectly edible. Nothing else on Earth keeps that long because nothing else on Earth is quite so inhospitable to the things that cause decay. Find raw honey from a local beekeeper if you can. If you can't, look for honey that says raw and unfiltered on the label and is cloudy, not perfectly clear. A spoonful in warm water in the morning. A spoonful straight at the first sign of a scratchy throat. On wounds. On burns. The good Lord made it sweet and medicinal at once. That is not an accident. That is design. Garlic, crushed. Every day. The Israelites wandering in the wilderness wept over garlic. Numbers 11:5. They had manna from heaven and they were crying about garlic. Most people read that and think, how dramatic. I read that and think, they understood exactly what they had lost. I crush 2 cloves of garlic every single morning. I let them sit for about 10 minutes after crushing before I use them. And this is important because crushing activates the compound allicin, and allicin needs a few minutes to fully form before heat or stomach acid breaks it down. My grandmother didn't know the biochemistry. She just always crushed her garlic ahead of time and let it sit. She learned it from her mother, and her mother learned it from hers. Allicin is a broad-spectrum antimicrobial. It fights bacteria, viruses, fungi and parasites with genuine documented effectiveness. Clinical trials have shown that people who eat garlic regularly get sick less often, recover faster when they do get sick, and have significantly better cardiovascular markers, lower blood pressure, better cholesterol ratios, reduced platelet clumping that leads to clots. Egyptian medical papyri, documents from 3,000 years ago, list garlic in over 20 separate medical preparations. The workers who built the pyramids were partially paid in garlic and onions because the overseers understood these foods maintained strength and prevented disease. They told you garlic breath was a social problem. That was the most successful thing the breath mint industry ever did. They convinced people to stop eating the most powerful antimicrobial food available because it made their breath unpleasant at cocktail parties. Every person who gave up daily garlic for social convenience and replaced it with nothing is making their immune system pay the price. I am not interested in that trade. Figs, fresh in season, dried the rest of the year. This is the one that gets people, because they know figs are in the Bible, but they think of them as background detail. The fig tree Jesus cursed. The leaves Adam and Eve used. They don't think of figs as medicine. But 2 Kings 20 tells a different story. King Hezekiah is dying from a severe infection, a boil so serious the prophet Isaiah tells him to get his affairs in order. And then Isaiah prescribes a poultice of figs pressed directly onto the wound. They apply it. The king recovers. That is a medical prescription recorded in Scripture, not a metaphor. Not a miracle in the conventional sense. A healer identifying a plant remedy for an infectious wound condition, applying it, and watching it work. Figs contain phycin, a proteolytic enzyme. That's just a word for something that breaks down protein, including the dead and damaged tissue around an infected wound, that has genuine wound-healing properties. The antimicrobial compounds in fig latex have been documented in research to inhibit bacterial growth. People dismissed this for decades as folk medicine. The biochemistry was there the whole time. I eat dried figs every day, 3 or 4 with my morning coffee, or in the afternoon when I want something sweet. They are extraordinarily rich in soluble fiber that feeds the beneficial bacteria in the gut, in magnesium and potassium and calcium that most people over 60 are quietly deficient in. My mother ate dried figs her whole life and never had the digestive trouble that seems to be considered an inevitable part of aging these days. I have never had it either. The good Lord wrapped extraordinary medicine in something that tastes like candy. That is the kind of generosity I have built my whole life around. Lentils. More than Esau's mistake. Yes, Esau traded his birthright for lentil stew. That sounds foolish until you remember that Esau had just come in from the field, exhausted and starving, and what Jacob was cooking smelled like the most satisfying thing in the world. Red lentil stew with cumin and coriander and olive oil. I make it myself and I completely understand Esau's decision. No judgment from me. Lentils were the protein of the ancient world. Dense, filling, shelf-stable for years when dried and nutritionally extraordinary. 1 cup of cooked lentils gives you 18 grams of protein, nearly your full daily requirement of folate, significant iron, magnesium, potassium and zinc, alongside fibre that slows digestion and keeps blood sugar stable for hours. They told you meat was the only real protein. They built an entire food culture around the idea that plant protein was inferior and insufficient. Meanwhile, population research consistently shows that communities around the world who live the longest eat large amounts of legumes. Not large amounts of meat. Legumes. I eat lentils 2 or 3 times a week, slow cooked with cumin and garlic and finished with a pour of olive oil. That combination of the lentils, the garlic, the cumin, the oil has been eaten in the Middle East for thousands of years. And it turns out each component makes the others work better. The oil helps absorb the fat-soluble compounds from the spices. The cumin improves digestion of the lentils. The garlic adds antimicrobial protection. Old recipes are old because they work. That's the only reason they survived. Pomegranate, the fruit on the priest's robe. Listen to me. When the Lord instructed Moses on how to make the garments of the high priest, he specified pomegranates embroidered along the hem. Exodus 28. 200 pomegranates on the pillars of Solomon's temple. This fruit was everywhere in sacred design, and modern antioxidant research is genuinely startled by what's inside it. Pomegranates contain a compound called punicalagin found almost nowhere else in nature. In the gut, it converts into compounds called urolithins that have shown remarkable anti-inflammatory effects in research, effects that, in some studies, appear to protect muscle tissue from age-related breakdown and reduce inflammatory markers throughout the body. The juice has been shown in multiple clinical trials to reduce blood pressure, lower oxidized LDL, the dangerous kind of cholesterol, improve arterial elasticity, and reduce inflammatory markers. The polyphenol concentration outranks green tea and red wine. I eat the seeds fresh when they're in season. I drink the juice, real pomegranate juice, not pomegranate-flavored sugar water, through the winter. And I occasionally make tea from dried pomegranate rind, which traditional Middle Eastern healers have used for gut infections and diarrhea for centuries, and which has documented antimicrobial tannins that justify that use. The whole fruit, not the extract, not the supplement. The fruit the way it comes off the tree, the way the priests wore it on their robes, that is what I eat. Barley, the grain they forgot. They convinced an entire culture to be afraid of carbohydrates. All of them, every grain. Ancient wisdom thousands of years in the making, dismissed in a decade because someone wrote a best-selling book, and the low-carb industry had money to spend on marketing. The people who invented that rule have not lived as long as I have. I'm just observing. When Jesus fed 5,000 people in John 6, the loaves were barley bread. Barley was the grain of ordinary people. Farmers, fishermen, labourers. And it turns out those ordinary people were eating one of the most gut-protective grains ever analysed by modern nutrition science. Barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan of any grain. Beta-glucan. That's just the name for a specific type of soluble fibre that forms a thick gel in your digestive system, slowing everything down in the best possible way. That gel traps cholesterol and carries it out. It slows glucose absorption so your blood sugar doesn't spike. It feeds beneficial gut bacteria. It has been so convincingly proven to lower cholesterol that regulators allow heart health claims on foods that contain it. Barley has a lower glycemic response than wheat or rice. It provides sustained energy the way ancient grains were meant to, slowly, steadily, without the crash. I cook whole barley as a porridge some mornings. Sometimes I add it to soups the way my grandmother added it to everything because it stretched a pot and filled people up and kept them filled for hours. She didn't know the word beta-glucan. She knew that barley held people. That is the same thing. Cumin, the spice Jesus named. This is the only spice specifically named by Jesus in the Gospels. Matthew 23:23. He references the Pharisees tithing their mint and dill and cumin. You don't tithe something worthless. The fact that cumin was considered valuable enough to bring to the temple tells you everything about how the ancient world viewed this spice. I put cumin in nearly everything savoury I cook. Lentils, beans, roasted vegetables, eggs. My mother did the same. Her mother did the same. The smell of cumin toasting in a dry pan is one of the most comforting smells I know. It smells like every kitchen I've ever loved. Cumin stimulates the production of digestive enzymes and bile. It reduces bloating and gas. It has genuine antimicrobial properties from a compound called cuminaldehyde, and multiple clinical studies have now shown that regular cumin consumption can improve blood sugar control and insulin sensitivity in people with type 2 diabetes. The spice that was worth tithing to the temple is sitting in most people's spice racks going stale because they only use it once a year for chili. Use it every day. Toast it first, whole seeds in a dry pan until fragrant. Then grind it or add it whole. That's how the ancient world used it. That's how the medicine gets released. Almonds. The shape of sacred light. God told Moses to design the lamps of the tabernacle with cups shaped like almond blossoms. Aaron's rod, the one that miraculously budded overnight to confirm his priesthood, budded with almonds. The almond was the symbol of divine watchfulness, the first tree to wake from winter and bloom sometimes while snow is still on the ground. The Lord chose the almond to represent urgency, attentiveness, and life returning. And then he quietly put it into one of the most nutritionally complete foods a human being can eat. One small handful of raw almonds gives you more than a third of your daily vitamin E, the fat-soluble antioxidant that protects your cell membranes from oxidative damage. It gives you significant magnesium, which supports over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body and is deficient in a staggering proportion of older adults. Protein, calcium, healthy fats that the heart knows exactly what to do with. Clinical research on almonds specifically has shown improvements in LDL cholesterol, blood sugar response after meals, gut microbiome diversity, and satiety, the feeling of being genuinely full that prevents overeating. I eat a handful of raw almonds every afternoon. Have for decades. They keep me from reaching for something I shouldn't reach for. They keep my hands and mind busy during the hour when the day gets long. And they have been providing these benefits since before the tabernacle was built. The sacred symbol and the practical food were never two different things. That is the pattern of the whole Bible if you look for it. Now, let me tell you what sits underneath all of it. I've given you 8 foods I eat every single day. Not supplements, not powders, not extracts from something that had to be shipped across 3 continents in a refrigerated container. Food. Real food, the kind that grows in the ground or on a tree or in a hive, the kind that has been feeding and healing human beings for thousands of years. But I want to be honest with you about something, because I think you deserve honesty more than you deserve another list. The food is not actually why I'm still here. I know. You came for the food and now I'm changing the subject. Stay with me. The food is part of it. These things matter. What you put in your body every day over a century of days that accumulates. It adds up into either strength or weakness, clarity or fog, resilience or fragility. But I have known people who ate well and died young. And I have known people who by rights should have been gone decades ago who are still shuffling around, still laughing, still calling their grandchildren on Sunday. The difference was not their diet. It was whether they still wanted to be here. I lost my 3rd husband 12 years ago. I have buried 2 of my 5 children, which is a grief I would not wish on anyone, a grief that sits in a particular place in the chest that nothing ever fully dislodges. I have had mornings, plenty of them, where getting out of bed required more than habit or hunger or a good night's sleep. What got me out of bed was that I was not finished. There were still people who needed me. There was still the garden in the spring. There was still something the Lord had not yet asked me to finish. That is the real medicine. Purpose. The conviction that your presence in this world is not yet surplus to requirements. That someone, somewhere, is better for the fact that you are still here and still paying attention. Feed yourself the foods the Lord put in his book. Eat the olive oil and the raw honey and the garlic and the figs. Eat the lentils and the barley and the almonds and the pomegranate. These are gifts and they are worth receiving. But don't let taking care of your body become the point of your life. Let it be the foundation so you can get on with the point of your life, which is loving the people in front of you, doing the work only you can do, and staying curious about what the Lord might be growing in you even now. My coffee is getting cold.